of my doctoral work will be in here, but I feel like Rhonda and Trine have done some really good foundational work, because Kim's probably been a couple to my presentations. I normally start the same way, but I wanted to start it different today, because I'm trying to play with this new theory, and to follow that up, the question up at the back around decolonising. I'm hoping to problematise that word a little bit in actually bringing in this idea of holding a space for Tricking the Trickster, relational accountability in Aboriginal ethics and community health research. But before we get started, I better get my notes ready. Thank you very much, Mel, for bringing my notes. Why is it not looking next? Just want to acknowledge that I do have images of people who are in the dreaming, my family, and I also might mention people who are in the dreaming, but I just want to really show my respect and acknowledgement to grief, loss and sorrow business in our communities. So yeah, I hope that doesn't cause too much distress. But we begin in a place that grounds me to the Gamilaroi Nation, and this little place is called Little Wave Rock, located at the second hill of Moore Creek Mountain, just 40 minutes or so from Moombi. I got to come up from Moombi, coming up from Tamworth today, a place and country of my mother's family who lived here for generations. This place is my tethering to country, which encapsulates my thinking, my experiences, and the stories of our future ancestors, our children. So I take this time to acknowledge country and all that it encompasses. I pay respects to elders past, present, and future, but I also acknowledge Aboriginal people across the many diverse nations and sovereign places of this place we now call Australia, recognising our continuing connections to land, water, sea, sky and sovereignty. I open this space and like Wilson researches ceremony. Gooniymarr calls. Gooniymarr calls. Gooniymarr calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? Gooniymarr calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? Gooniymarr calls, it's time. Time to return to a sacred place and dance upon a sacred ground. Gooniymarr calls. Can you hear? Can you listen? I thought it was poignant to put a picture up here of Boundary Rock. I've never done many sort of events, but as you come through Tamworth, Boundary Rock is an important story for us here, particularly as we're seated here on Anaiwan land. And what's interesting is between Gamilaroi and Anaiwan land, this is our meeting place. This place has stories, stories that have long not been told, but also been told and continue to be told. But I also like to think about how country is a teacher. Country is a methodology in which we learn, sit, listen, be, open. And boundary lines on country also could be translated into boundaries in which we understand who we are and then how we go about our place and ways in which we work. So think about those boundaries. What are my boundaries? Where are my boundary lines? So drawing from country, understanding country as a teacher. So just looking at the map there, so boundary line, you would have seen it. It's about, I don't know, I'm not really good. But so it's up here, about there. Maybe a bit out there, a bit more. And so you can imagine the big trek that people would have had to come right up from Anaiwan land. They come all the way down here. And what's really significant about this site is it is a men's site in one of the areas. We have the Boundary Rock. But there's also these stories for our women. You know, where is the women's sites? Where is our place? Where is our countries? Particularly in relationship to ceremony. But firstly, I want to talk about Quirindi, because everything's about place and country for me. Quirindi, if you're the one that knows, you know, or Quirindi, if you want to be Western, or Quirindi. My connections, acceptance, family and community are located in this place. 45 minutes or so from the place known as Galar or Tamworth. Known as the place of the dead tree on the hill, my grandfather has stories of that place, particularly where this very namesake tree is located. Pardon me. A place of significance, of sacredness, a place of gathering, ceremony and obligation to country. For our people, these stories of this place have long been since told, yet our connection to Gooniymarr continues and she's waiting for these stories and ceremonies to return. As an Aboriginal person, what it means to be a person is to be relational. To be Aboriginal is to be relational, and it's not an individual experience. Instead, it's collective, generational, layered. And put simply, you become a person through your relationships, kins, ancestors, and communities. And our identities are inherently tied to this sense of place and country. And for example, hence we say, where are you? Who are you from? Where's your family? Where are you at? What's your last name? Where are you going? I need to know who you are. And that's that connection point, that storying of who we are and how we're connected. But I also think about country as this obligation to outside of ourselves. So rather than the individualistic rights of autonomous self, or this modern concept of I am independent, strong, and I can do what I want without caring, this goes in conflict. Instead, I am not human because I am. Instead, I live in relation to country and others, forming and shaping my personhood through relations. And I'm trying a bit of a tricky story to tell you today. And I want to draw from this book that I just picked up the other day, and it has Professor Kim Usher's little stamp in it, and I'm going to hold on to it forever. She's forgotten she's given it to me, but she now remembers. But Joanne Archibald's work on story work. And the first sort of story she talks about is the Coyote. And if you look at my thesis and you go all the way down to the end, there's this story about my pop, a story about my grandfather. And I don't know much about that stories. I know a bit of it. But I knew there was a trickster spirit there. And so I went back into this book, Joanne's book, and I read this quote. The trickster is a comic world, surviving by his wits, prevailing in good humour. He's a collective, hardly or ever isolation. And when he's in isolation, almost always in trouble. In life-threatening situations, he has to get out through ritual or symbolic acts. And through the reversals, he has to come back to imagination, to people, and to places. And so when I think about the trickster in Aboriginal health research, I want to warn you with some tricks that can trick you into yourself and thinking you're doing the right thing. But I want you to stay in the tricksterville. This trickster's never sure. He's always humble, he's always learning, he's always up to mischief. And that's where I want to draw the story today. So this is my grandfather here and my father. You'll see that photo in my thesis as well. But here on the other side, here is my great uncle Ron, my great grandfather Winnie, or William Manuel Smallwood, if you know Crindai. And then there's my pop Biggie, Keith Lionel Smallwood. Like I said, I don't know what stories to share you about the idea of why my pop and my grandfather's a trickster. Probably the one story I want to share with you is this idea of identity. I remember this one time we'll drive, and me and Pop drive along, going, oh yeah, we're going through Crindai. And we looked over at the club and we're like, oh yeah, you big cat spent a lot of time there. Pop, he's like, yeah. You know, they wouldn't let the black fellas in there after the war. What? They wouldn't let the black fellas in there after the war. And then so my Pop shared this story with me. I said, well, what about you, Pop? What about you? They didn't know I was black. So this is this story of identity. This story of being a trickster, but not also. It's an unfinished story, this one here, so I'm going to lay that tension there for you. But I want to talk about particularly this idea of tricksterness through Vensner's work. And this idea, oh, I've skipped the page. I want to sort of position this story as the trickster of identity. That's my number one thing. But first, Elder, I see you. I see you working hard. I do. I see you. Elder, I see you across time. You weave our people to their culture. You hold them tight. Elder, I see you. You share your love and respect. Elder, I see you. Sorry, Uncle Nev. You give time and energy. You give it all. Elder, I see you. Your feet are firmly planted upon her sacred ground. Elder, I see you. You heal our young ones. You cuddle the old, and you believe for our futures. Elder, I see you. You heal our trauma. You hold our stories and give us hope. Elder, I see you. What can I repay? Elder, I see you. I'm going to not explain that. But I want to start with these two quotes. Weisner, he was one of the major informers about how I actually got my discussion chat together. I wrote my discussion chapter, sent it out to Kim. She's like, yep, you're ready to submit. I'm like, what? Yes, I was. But it was because of Weisner's work and this idea of survivance hermeneutics, playing on the concept of the trickster. But most importantly, the categorization, the westernization of the word trickster is limited. Westernization of the straitjacket of English or the colonizer's language in which only have access to speak limits the idea of the trickster. And so the trickster is a story, many different indigenous populations globally. Issue from Africa, you've got the Coyote over in Northern America. The only story I could try and find on a Google search, again, the limitations of colonial stories, is that our survivors and Aboriginal stories like the tricksters, they're still out there, yet to be heard, yet to be told. And so I thought about the trickster. He's never written about as evil, nor written about as an advantage of weakness. Take advantage, sorry. My imagined tricksters are compassionate and comic, and that's what I want to lean into today. I also want to bring in Bayo Akinola's story. He talks about this story about the trickster, but I wanted to sort of frame you to listen to a podcast maybe later on today if you're driving home. And he has this beautiful podcast called It's Love is About Becoming. And he talks about the trickster story in that as well. But I want to problematise the problematization of Aboriginal people right now. I want to challenge the deficit discourse. Because if whilst ever we continue to write research papers that make my people look sick and unwell and unhealthy and unhopeful, we are going to continually find the same problems and we'll never have the solutions we need to go forward. So how we respond to crisis is part of the crisis. Sometimes victory is ironic. So how we frame matters. So just a quick summary, I thought I'm going to keep these company, keep everyone on track, but also me on track. So the first part is tricking. So this is the cautionary tales of my stories, my lessons, but also stories and lessons I've shared from my community's experiences in relation to health research. But I also have, using my beautiful brain head, I've got my magpie up there. So I'm black, white, not quite right. But that's my magpie, so I've looked at these theories and I've thought about it through my lens. So the trickster. So using Weisner's work, he teaches resistance through play, shifting forms, teasing assumptions. But most importantly, Weisner, but also Archibald's work on Indigenous story. Your research has to be respectful, relevant. I can't remember all the R's, I'll find them somewhere here in a minute. But this idea of story is embedded into time, place, space. Stories can't be told out of context. But acknowledging, Archibald's work, I was like, right, I know to think about relational accountability. And this is where I went back to Martin and Maripo's work. Martin and Maripo, that's the same person. When you try and publish in a Western publishing way, they publish in English, they name your Aboriginal name. But this idea is story is a way to maintain balance and relational accountability. Every story teaches about law and relationship between people, country, and all living things. But through our ethics then, connections to places, shapes, affinity, ethics and social structures, these aren't abstract principles. Thinking about, we've got this outsider's approval to go and do this research, whose approval are we seeking? It's through institutions, it's through health systems, education systems, through AHMRC. But what I want to challenge you also as well is that in everyday actions and reciprocal relationships, our ethics should not be merely idealised or theoretic constructs. Instead, they need to be situational and they need to have that ongoing practice notion. And you can check out Sherwood's thesis, who's the first person, Indigenous woman in this country, to talk about the need for situational ethics. But using the trickster metaphor of Alchemalav, what happens when we leave in the cracks, when we refuse to polish the polished narrative of progress, and when we unsettle ourselves to be unsettled? The trickster helps us practice that. But first we want to start here. So we know 260 different distinct nations, 500 plus distinct dialects, language groups, and within each of those nation groups there's sets of family groups, kinship groups, and through all those connections to place, country, and all living things, sea, sky, water, trees, rocks, our place, our dreaming, our stories are on those places. And what quite quickly happens in relation to health research is we think we can put a broad spanner across this and go, right, we're going to do this project, we're going to upscale it in Canberra, we're going to go to Narrabri, we're going to go to Crindai. But this is the fear of it. And I always bring this into my presentation because what context are we talking about here? Are we talking about Armidale, Sydney, Brisbane, Darwin? Are we talking about Broken Hill? Are we talking about in the middle of Arnhem Land? So context. Always think in the frame of your minds, context. And then we're going to go down one more layer, community. And I mean not one community, multiple communities within communities. Social communities, political communities, but also location-based communities. I know I'm connected to Tamworth community, even though I'm like, nah, I'm still Crindai mob. Got Crindai mob, but all these connections could be also, but I'm also politically located as a nurse, an Aboriginal nurse researcher, etc. And then the third C of my 3 C's is country. What country are we talking about here? What is the country in which the person, the context, the community is positioned in? What is their experiences with accessing country? Do they have sites like Boundary Rock? Do they have men's sites to do initiation and ceremony? Is there places for our women to gather and connect to country, connect to story? So thinking about context, community, country. All right, that's one more job we're going to do today. So there's tensions to hold, tensions to unravel, and think about how then we move forward in this tricky space. So I want you to consider the tensions and complexities that are both written here and left out. What is spoken, what is not spoken. I'm not a knower of all. I can't speak on behalf of Tamworth mob, Aboriginal mob, any mob. I can speak on behalf of me. But I want you to acknowledge also that I'm going to leave room for unknowing and knowing in this space. I'm going to leave you now in the nexus of tensions, inviting you to construct meaning where we, as poets, leave doors to possibilities to open to embrace the complexity of ambiguity. Can't say that, Kim. Ambiguity.
Ambiguity.
So all that I've said, consider where you are, where I am, and how others will challenge, reflect. Remember this yarn, I am one story, one lens. So let's start unpacking a bit more of Graham's work. Honey Mary Graham, if you have not Googled her on YouTube, oh my goodness. Her words melt like butter and honey and yes, anyway, the dreaming is a combination about meaning and life and order. And I mean dreaming as a very Western word to explain a very complex concept that I'm only a kindergartner in, you know. So grounded in this dreaming, 2 fundamental relationships must be maintained. First, between country and people. Second, between people and themselves. And the second is always contingent on the first. Because the way we treat country will reflect on how we treat people. So, thus, where our meaning comes from country, and our individually as a person is always found in the collective. You know, that's why people that don't belong, have a sense of identity, etc., are feeling, you know, I'm lost. You know, you see all these disparities around mental health and well-being globally. Where is our community? Where is our connections? Where is our collective? And Mary Graham says in her work, to live outside of the collective, or to be a conscious isolate, is to limit yourself to be an observer in an observed world. I like that word, isn't it? Conscious isolate, to be observer in an observed world. You're just watching what's happening. You're not part of it. You're not being part of it. You're just watching people do stuff. And then building on again from this connection to country, taking you back to place. Place then is both a site of trauma, of healing, of memories and futures. Disconnection from place disrupts who we are as persons and how then we're connected to one another and our responsibilities beyond self. This disconnection is layered with grief across many places in this country. Yet, importantly, all Aboriginal people have and always will have connection to place. Within our kinship networks embedded into the dreaming. We are all part of the dreaming, and country will always remain our greatest teacher in the life-death cycle of life. So how did I stay accountable? How did I take this long world view, and how did I prepare this speech for you today around tricking the tricks through the tricky situations of Aboriginal research, relationality? This is from my thesis, and I just put it into the presentation. But I kind of went back and said, oh, I wrote that pretty good, didn't I? I was like, oh. Anyway, so the tensions are unlimited. The need for community involvement from varied Aboriginal controlled organisations is complex, and community politics remains a space of uncertainty and careful progress by those all involved. I remember my story of starting out in an Aboriginal project that was rife with problems and paternalistic, colonial, power-induced bull stuff. And so when I went up to my sister girl, Kylie Taylor, I want to call her Nani, but she doesn't like that. I said, well, how am I going to work this project? I can't fix it. What am I going to do? Oh, it's broken, etc. And she said, as Aboriginal people in our communities, you learn protocols and obligations from being connected with community. Knowing and implementing these protocols and obligations is the doing part of this process. And why I'm drawing out this quote right now in relation to the doing, there's two things. There's internal governance in ourselves, there's external governance, but then we think, oh, we can go, no, be, do, go do this, go do this. But the doing part is the magic here. And like Vesna, the trickster is always a doing action. Shares, the trickster is a doing, not an essence, not a museum being, not an aesthetic presence. And from which this information, which Vesna coined this idea of trickster, Archibald said, all right, okay, so then we can use trickster stories for a way of new learning. And so that's how I want to situate this yarn today. We're going to use the trickster stories to understand ways in which we can learn forward. But I had to sort of think about this, because I went rushing off thinking I was doing a great job in this project, and Lisa, my darling sister here, would tell me the lessons I learned along the way. One of these projects, we had this big launch, big fancy event, got everyone in, everyone, oh, great. And my beautiful friend, as we were cutting the cake and getting all celebratory about great works and the project and about putting all these stickers all over the hospital and the cultural garden, all this stuff, she come running in and said, it's ironic that you're celebrating and having a fun time right now. Because I just had to have a fight with a nurse back in the ward who's treating this man so terribly. No one's listening to him, they've left him in his bed to shovel, close off, you know, how nurses can leave their patients in disheveled mess. Not their fault sometimes, but it happens. She said, this is ironic. We're here talking about this project that's going to solve issues for Aboriginal health, yet we can't even get this part right over here. So this is that obligation. And Kim can tell you also, I keep running off on it. I know what to do, I'm a great researcher. But when we don't get it right, we can't move forward. When we think we're getting it right and we haven't reflected, we haven't taken time to listen, we haven't been there, haven't done that, haven't learned, listened, we can run into trouble really quick. And so, to continually honour and hold space that requires to honour the protocols, the obligations that were gifted to me. Gifted. Aboriginal participation in your project is a gift, it's a privilege, not a right. And that had to remain on the forefront of my mind, but also this idea of Murray critical consciousness, which Barcombe woman, another PhD student of Kim's, Lenore Geyer, she talks about the emphasis of our knowing, being, and doing is centred around the heart. Sitting with these words here and the pursuit to know things, or even unknown things, I had to be conscious of the colonial influences on my mind. I am white and black. My mother, German English. My father, Aboriginal, yes, but also French. I think I've found French. And what was the other one? German, no. Welsh, Irish. But anyway, I had to remember the continual constant pressure in which colonialism sits us in. And that's what I want to say about decolonising. I'm removing myself from using that word until we understand that whilst we're ever trying to decolonise systems and institutional colonial systems, we're just pushing. We're pushing up the hill. And it's this vocabulary that actually can be troubling for us. And I'm going to explain that through this idea of context relatedness, context stories. And I really sat with these words for a long time, particularly around the idea of, you can go out and get your AHMRC book or your NHMRC book, your best practice guides. But these authors back in 2020 said, whilst the Universal Indigenous culture is attached to the core 6 principles of NHMRC, there is no mention of the 500 and Torres Strait Islander clan groups across this continent. Beyond excessively adorned with culture, these frameworks untether the black bodies from their families, communities and cultural contexts. So, we can be left in the hands of enlightened health researchers who come in thinking they know the solutions before even listening. So this is kind of a reminder to you. So when a person comes into your classroom, if you teach Aboriginal health like me, they say, oh, Keita, can you tell me a story? Or can you tell me why we don't look Aboriginal people in the eyes? Or can you tell me what we do about Aboriginal people, etc.? And I go, right, do you remember that lecture on Ona? Yeah. And I said, I want you to go back to that IAT system, and I want you to think about that question again. I can't answer for you. I can't give you a checklist or a list of items that you should do for every Aboriginal person. Because what does that create? Assumptions. It creates stereotypes or practice models that, again, take away the context, remove the person from their body, from their spirit, from their family, from their place, from their country. I put in a couple of more things here, but I don't know how much time I have. But I really wanted to sort of talk about, these are all the ones that really influenced my work. Kovac, another book that Kim gave me, was this idea to first subjugate and discredit Indigenous knowledge systems and the people themselves. Further, they marginalise of this, what is knowledge? Who counts what knowledge is? Who is the holder of knowledge? Where is the knowledge sitting? We're going out to find new knowledge. All these things. But thinking about how research has evolved from epistemologies, ontologies, axologies, and methodologies, research inherently is always Western. I'm trying to separate. I remember this, my methods chapter, I proudly said to Kim, I am not qualitative, I'm not quantitative. I'm in the Indigenous research paradigm. So, oh, a really strong chapter here. I had to come back and back and back and back and back to it. But I had to really think about what does count as knowledge. But then also thinking about Nakata's work. Indigenous people's knowledge is documented in ways that disensembles people from view other agents of it. When the knowers of what knowledge are separated from what comes to be the known, in ways that dislocates from its locale, it separates from its social institutions that uphold and reinforce its efficiency. And it cleaves us from the practices that are constantly renewed to its meaning in the here and now. You see this happen a lot in health research. Someone might share a story. That story goes, oh, great story, great story. And they tell it over here, they tell it over here, they tell it over here. And before we get down, maybe 4 years down the track, that story's changed so much. But the knowing of that story is forgotten, it's decontextualized, taken away from its original intent. And so I think it's about, when you want to go have yarning circles and what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is this idea, how am I going to keep this knowledge in context? How am I going to keep it in place? And how am I also going to present it? That's the other tricky thing, presentation. And this is not new stuff. This yarn happened 10 years ago. No one was discussing the elephant in the room. Bainbridge's beautiful literature review. She basically said, yeah, you fellas are doing great Aboriginal health research. Guess what? You've made no difference. Guess what? You just made us more sick. Or you've just seen us more through this deficit lens. And she also said, to actually bring it back to the ethical grounded definitions, it has to have this layering of the difference between research benefit and research impact. And to actually make it benefit, it has to be incorporated from Indigenous worldviews, values and priorities, not just those conventional metrics that we like to get for our promotions. Instead, to improve meaningful research for the nature of benefit, it has to come from Aboriginal benefit-led approaches. It must have Indigenous participation and leadership before it even starts to think about being a research project. And it has to then have ways in which there has to be shared accountability between the community and the researchers. And that's the part that gets a bit tricksy as well, particularly when you start rolling out your grant, putting all your reports into the big grant holding peoples. And again, the knowledge of which your story happens in your research can quite quickly get wrapped up into those metrics, those practices, those busy works that remove them from further and further and further away from your original intent of wanting to help. And there's also another recent review. If you're looking out there to put some grants in now, Indigenous experts on those grants will actually see co-design as a trigger word now, actually. It's a trigger word, don't use it in your applications. Because, funny thing, we're going to go in with co-design, you're going to be so part of this process, come on. But where is the power held and stayed? The organisations that hold the grants. Who owns the power in which the grants are held in, the institutions, etc. And so when you think about Fox design, you think about led by non-Indigenous organisations and governments. There's often this hierarchy of power. They'll send out their steering committee notes, they'll send out their working group notes, they'll have their minutes, they'll have their agendas. It comes then, or it's located in that colonial knowledge system, often it prefaces or privileges empirico-analytical methods, or this idea or concept of control. I've had a recent experience with a random control trial. I'm not going to share much more than that. And then also, there's always these predetermined outcomes. Yeah, we're going to go solve the world, make better for Aboriginal people, for Aboriginal, with, by. Again, thinking about language. There's no Indigenous data sovereignty, so things like Julie asked around who owns what data, how do we protect it, that's even being thought of. The university owns all that, don't you worry about that, bros. But it's normally this opaque, rigid process, and the defence in which the research starts to fall apart, if the community's like walking away from it, the defence is always to go back to the rigour of the method. That's where the power is held. So you can review this. I just chucked it all in there for you. Some of the key things that they really said, which I want to bring my point home to, is this idea of reflection should be both internal and relational. Consider our worldviews, the perspectives we bring to the process. And without this, we can't go to co-design. Without critical reflection, there's no co-design. Another key principle is it has to be led, not just from when you get the grant, at the very beginning, starting at how do you even identify this issue? So it has to be underpinned by good policy, strong evidence, rigorous research, but most importantly, you have to make sure, and this is what Kim taught me, you have to make sure that you put your metrics in your budget for your data to actually spend 12 months, 18 months listening. Have that protected time to really understand what you want to do, how you want to do it, through time and relationship. So you can't just rush in and go, I'm going to do this, this is what's going to happen, because that's where it can fall apart. Are we concerned? We are. I wanted to try that out. This is again from Bayo's work, Akama Last Life work, and it leans into the problems in which we're faced with now in our space. Is this idea of, since the very first colonial gaze, there's been this preoccupation with observing, analysing, studying, classifying, labelling us, who we are as Aboriginality. What does that mean? And through this gaze, Aboriginality is being practiced from a daily practice to this practice of a problem to be solved. If you haven't seen Arnie, I can't remember it now, I'll share it later. But there's this really powerful thing she said on Q&A. I am not the problem. I have never left my country. You know, this sort of story. And this is how we write research. How do we write a grant? Well, the first thing most people do is Aboriginal versus non-Aboriginal. Well, why are we even comparing? But the most challenging thing is the way to solve our problems today isn't to provide solutions, because they perpetuate the same logic they're to nullify. People have built careers, said another way, people have built careers in academia, mainly health research, on the profit of keeping Aboriginal people unwell, or seeing our communities as unwell, seeing our communities as a problem to be solved. And I want to challenge you to think about that we have to engage in a different problem altogether, a new paradigm. The imperative is not to ask the hard questions opposed to advance the convenient ones, but it's to ask different questions, to disrupt the linearity of the former. Then, it's not to tell the same story. Aboriginal people compared to non-Aboriginal people in relation to mental health symptoms. It's not to say the same story with a new accent, and enhanced vocabularies. For example, decolonising, I think, is going to be a trigger word in about 5 years. I'll pay you for that bet. But this imperative to tell another story, totally different in subtext, assumptions, plot and pace. And that's what I want to leave you with today. I want to tell you a different story about the trips that we can take in relation to academia. But first I want to think about, why is the deficit discourse so challenging to unravel? How do we move through it? Medical students' critical engagement with publications related to strategies addressing health disparities of Indigenous people in Australia. Critically iterative and iteratively critical. This is an MD student project I done a couple of years ago, finally got it published this year. And we went into this idea of hermeneutics. And I want to share some of their words because I think they're really important. As we began to understand the topic more deeply, we felt strongly that texts that should not be limited to high-impact journals, as this would inadvertently promote empirico-analytical paradigm and privileged colonial perspectives. So they went into the literature purposely going, we're not going to just focus on high-impact journals here, we need to see what else is other people are saying. But actually, to challenge the deficit discourse in health and wellbeing research, it's very precarious. And it's really hard not to perpetuate the objectiveness of perspectives. And so when the students actually then went into the work, they had to start developing a critical eye in the ways in which they interpreted literature. Again, thinking about this interpretation of the literature being precarious because it always comes back to the preferencing of objective ways of knowing and doing. For example, hardline quant scientists. And they're saying here at the end, we're deliberately not concluding to answer the series of research questions, rather join us in our ongoing journey of critical reflectivity. And we have to get our students to do this as well, we have to get our colleagues to do this as well. How are we critically engaging the text in which we're engaging within this space? First point in time, what's their first statement? Is it a comparative statement? Is it a deficit statement? But through this reflection and this critical engagement and how we engage with text, sources, or resources, whatever you want to say, it's actually how then we can move to societal transitions and actually develop high levels of criticality to actually then deepen and understand what does this mean for us and others and how do we understand it. Importantly, they found that more of the deficit-based discourse that they read, the more that we were searching for less, a different story. So my first tricky story, and I normally had story 3, 2 and 1, or 2, 1 anyway, but I was like, no, just keep them in 1, 2, 3 Kinder. If you use the same tools, you'll always have the same outcomes. Or, if you look at the same lens, you'll always see the same picture. For example, you can see that looks like a 6 on that 4, and I can see that looks like a 9. And this is what sort of Bayo Akmalov, Annie Mary Graham, Maggie Kovac, Karen Martin, they all said there's multiple truths, multiple lenses, multiple ways to see through. And what westernised objective science, particularly in our biomedical approaches, continues to take out the the relationalness to understanding the situation. And they try and use this top-down view, and then they get the same outcome. And we're all just sitting back going, yeah, no, it's not surprising. But also, if we're looking to solve a problem, and we've done it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, you often hear aunties talk about stories. For example, my mum was an Aboriginal health worker 40 years ago. This is a story, and they go, it's interesting, so we're coming back full circle again to where we started 40 years ago. And we're always going round and round and round. But we have to understand though, we also can hide behind our methods and our objectivity. And we can also hide behind the fact that someone outside of us has given us approval. The hard line, I've got AHMRC now, I've got my ethics, I'm going to go out and about and deliver. I can hide behind that method. And that's that, that institutional approach to research methods of priority, a hold to the protocol, all that kind of thing. But this actually perpetuates or adds to the deficit discourse through that holding on of that method, grounded in that objective ways of looking. And importantly, we know that when we decontextualise or we rely heavily on rational, rigid, scalable, and flexible objectivity, this actually can harm us. It can create, can silence us, our stories, our knowledges, And ultimately, without meaningful listening, engagement, reflexive methods, and cultural leadership, our communities will continue to walk with their feet. So if you're in a project and you see things going about the same ways, same solutions, same outcomes, what about that has to change? How do we see that? How do we create a litmus test in our communities to see if our research is going to work? We actually have to firstly be aware, are we cognizant of the fact that we need to understand how our research is reflected in communities before we go and have these understandings? And I use this metaphor, I had a yarn with Anne Croker, but she likes to use this story as this idea of how would you go into a glass porcelain shop? How would you go in there? And what happens when these Western people come out to Indigenous communities, or you come have these people that want to come out with well-intended outcomes or professional expertise, methods, etc. They come in with these big, shiny suits of armour. Big, shiny suits of armour. They're trying to go into a glass shop. And that's my first tricky question for you is, what armour are you wearing when you enter an Aboriginal health research space? And I mean that by, do I have fear that I'm going to get it wrong? Do I have unconscious or conscious biases that make me think that I'm the solution here? Do I have privileges that the system allows me to maintain and keep? So do I expect my community members to turn up to a meeting that's not convenient for them, located for them, not a good time, but because it suits our system or our privileges of the resources that sit within our system, for example, a car, a computer, an internet. Again, what privileges are we taking into the space? What assumptions are we taking in it? We might feel, oh, you're an expert in Aboriginal health. I've been doing this for 25 years, I know the answer. What are we coming in? What type of armour would you want to take into the glass porcelain shop of Aboriginal health research? Do you want to be wearing a nice light cotton, ready to be learned, ready to be humble, ready to listen, but also be really humble with ourselves and acknowledge we're not going to get it right all the time. We're not going to get it good all the time either. It's going to be this back and forward process. So what armour are you wearing? Our tricky story too, it's not the what, it's the how. How you go about it, opposed to what we aim to do. How will I go about this? How will I move forward? How am I going to say, right, I've got to get consent, I've got to do it through this process? Shove it in someone's face, can you fill that out? Actually, no, I've got the consent, I've got to do it through the institutional process. And I'm going to turn that into a yarn. Come on, Wheels, I've got to have a yarn. And one of the stories that my friend was telling me was this idea of they kept pushing the consent away. She was trying to have a yarn about consent with a long existing relationship, had to go and get ethics. But she actually put the consent forms in front of the community and they kept pushing it away. Now she could just go off in her head and go, oh, they didn't want it, I'll try next time with the same approach. But what she actually did was, actually, why does our institution want to write our ethics forms the way they do? How do we not then work out how we do consent in ways that actually reflect the relationship? I think another number one thing in this space as well is avoid distractions or shiny lights, like awards and busy activity. Particularly when grants first start, they get a grant, we're going to put an award in, we're going to get that, we're going to do that keynote, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, and they get busy. They get busy responding to the distraction of the shiny lights of the system. I don't know if you're a researcher in here, but have you been distracted by shiny lights in the system? Yeah, when I say yeah, generally everyone's been, yeah. So thinking about, don't start doing these awards and busy activities that make your project look really good until you can actually show impact and benefit. Again, staying focused on principles of relationality, authentic power sharing, and ongoing critical reflection practice, knowing, being, and doing, and becoming. or looking for the trickster in new ways of knowing, being, and doing. Not being caught up in the doing that feeds tricking ourselves into research importance, but opposed to looking for the doing that make us look for new ways of knowing, being, and doing that benefits or seeks the benefit within community. But to be relational or to practice within this custodial ethic, it's not something we're simply born with. You don't wake up one day and go, yep, I'm Aboriginal, I'm connected, I've got a good community, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. No, it's continually practiced, continually cultivated through relationship, connection, action, and reflection. My ways of doing should reflect the way that I know being. My ways of knowing and being are inherently tied to how I do. It's all interconnected. But most importantly, time, place, space, and ongoing connection is always linked through ups, downs, ways of working with our communities. If you don't get your grant, if you have all this big rush to the end and you get a no, make sure you ring your elders or community members. Make sure you say, we didn't get it up, but I want to keep this yarn going. I am obligated to you, because you started that conversation of obligation way back then. They're going to remember you. They're going to remember you. And last and final thing, tricky story. So again, the only way to make Codesign work is critical reflection. Cultural humility. Unlearning, learning. Being always humble. Knowing when you get it wrong, not to get defensive and put your suited arm back, oh, that's what the university told me to do. No. You said when we got into this relationship, you would be accountable to me. Do not fall into that trap of, oh, that's what the university protects me for. No. It has to come from, I'm going to get it wrong, you're going to get it wrong, we're all going to get it wrong, but I'm going to really acknowledge that when I get it wrong, that's a really good goal moment. That's a real moment to think about how I can be more open, honest, humble, and reflective, and thinking about power and accountability. Now, the gift of cultural safety, capital C, capital S, from Dr. Irapidi Ramsden, is a theory, it is a framework, it should be capitalised. The term culture in this context is not about identity, ethnicity, or traditions, rather about the culture of power. And so if you don't know Ramsden's work, I want you to go to her thesis, which you can find on Croakley.com or whatever. And she's got these amazing practice examples around the power of attitude, etc., etc., etc. But to summarise, you won't actually know that you've done something wrong, okay, if you walk out into a space and not be willing to learn and listen and be open and honest and humble. Because what Ramsden said here, that the influence of attitude could be a powerful initiator or inhibitor of professional conduct. So if you've done something wrong in community in relation to your research approach, we can assume that you might find out about it, but potentially there may also be places in which you will not find out about it. Because those who've experienced the power of attitude in position are always vigilant, always aware of its presence, but also this idea that we can't go to a patient in the bed and say, hey, thought I've done a good job as your nurse today. I reckon I was real culturally safe. And if you weren't, what patient in their right mind will actually be able to say, no mate, you heard me took the cannula out, you put my catheter in, and you pulled my hair when you brushed my hair. You know what I mean? So we're not always going to know when we get it wrong. That's why you've always got to come back here. You've always got to come back here. So what kind of armour would you, could you, should you wear? And that's why I put Dr. Seuss there, because I found sounding like Dr. Seuss last night when I was putting this together. But really, are we looking in the mirror or trying to look through the window of culture? Are we looking in the mirror or through the window of culture? And Professor Annette Gainsford, Wiradjuri woman, she shared this analogy with me. I said, what is the basis of cultural safety in your approach to Indigenising curriculum? And she said this, are we looking in the mirror or through the window of culture? And what I mean by that is, I can make a lot of assumptions through the window of culture, yeah? Yeah, we can make a lot of assumptions about, right, you go do this in Aboriginal communities, you go do that in Indian communities, you go do that in Filipino communities. I don't know about them Australian fellas. You know what I mean? Stop trying to look through the window of someone else's culture and look in the mirror. That is your stuck leap in this space. So just take home last messages. I promise to try and bring the tricks of point home. If I'm comfortable making decisions without voice, guidance, relationship. So that's the problem. Always be uncomfortable and forever conscious of what armour we wear carrying into the space. Can I meaningfully make the right decision here without those who benefit most? It's about holding the integrity of the research methods and approvals, most of the relationships I'm accountable to. Go back. Relationships and relations are precarious and fraught with fragility. Colonial power institutions, and a long history of tokenism, no benefit and deficit based. We must remain obligated and accountable to relations. Methods and ways of being require relationship, connection, action, and reflection. And so the armour you potentially could be wearing into this space is that you might be a methods expertise in a certain area. And you go, right, I'm about to put my method to the test and put it in the Aboriginal community here. I want you to be conscious about that armour when you walk into that space. Again, am I looking through the window or am I trying to look through the mirror? Wrong way around. I don't have the time to engage, but I can get approval real quick and I can make it happen. If you do not have time to engage deeply and listen, ensure that you've listened, heard, known and remembered, or Bengali, which we call back home. You cannot do meaningful, benefit-led research in Aboriginal health and wellbeing contexts. You're just adding to the next 2025 literature review about the elephant in the room, okay? That's what you do. Time is the most crucial thing. You should ensure time to engage, should be accountable in approach, grants and ongoing work with community. Again, always think about what is the connection I'm accountable to and responsible to. I've been trained on how to conduct a yarning interview. It's a semi-structured interview, right? Knowing, being, doing, becoming is contingent on how we go about ways of working or our ways of doing within relationship to self, to others and the world around us. It is not realistic to use Western form understandings and methods without proper leadership, engagement, and reflective action on why, how, and what. Not just the aim, not just your intent, and not just the what that you're trying to solve. So I want to put a question here for you today. So are we being systematically curious towards new knowledge in health research, or situationally curious in our ways of doing and research that benefits communities in which you live, learn, work, play, and eat, I suppose? So just last few seconds. So poetry, like survivance hermeneutics, like a lot of all the methods I've drawn from story work, it's not a way of knowing, but instead the complex ways of knowing. To consider the conscious, subconscious, attention, intuition. Where between you and me, we dance a temporal movement to both soothe our souls and make decisions in mind of ethics and eunoia. And what I mean by ethics and eunoia is, you are my eunoia responsibility right now. I want to make sure I leave you with a good message. Go home well. Conscious I haven't taken to the depths of despair and hopelessness. So, time for a little bit different. I'm going to end with a poem, and yeah. I keep having this yarn with this version of myself who started this story long ago. I wonder what the yarn the two of us would have now and the insights I would bring to the young woman that I'm sure I will no longer recognise today. I would hold her hand to tell her to tread lightly and take her time, find time to be in space for silence. I would then give her a hug and tell her to let her move through the movement of emotion, let it move through her to flow with the current and let it not consume her. Feel all around you, I would say. That once she was through the storm, I would hug her again and tell her, tread lightly to find space for silence. That when grief comes knocking, find hope, I would say, reminding her to look for love and forgiveness for herself and others. To not be afraid, and that grief will be her teacher. Tread lightly and find space for silence. Governor Nindu, thank you. And that's Little Wave Rock where we began and where we ended. How'd that go? So I go way over time. I have no idea what time it is.
That was amazing. I'm going to withhold my commentary. I don't have the words. And are there any reflections, questions from the crowd in the room? Or online, perhaps? What we've organised now, because I think it's fair to say, Rakita, that you've actually given us so much to think about. And I personally need to reflect on that and not fill the room with commentary. So,
Come on, one question. Let us like answering. It's okay. No, I'm joking. You don't have to have a question.
Can we say thank you for that? It was
Yeah,
amazing.
Was it? Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'd just like to add to that, I think you were very brave today to take us in a new direction,
Yeah.
to try new things with us, and I thank you for that. So,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I hope I left a good message well. Yeah, never be tricked into thinking that you could be comfortable with my thing. Never be tricked into thinking that, too quick to solve a question or an answer. And always come back here, the heart. Because that will be the keeper of tallies. You can go about doing all great things, looking great, looking like a bright spark. The bugs will eventually catch up with you and find you, if that makes sense. The bugs come to light, they're going to find you. And whilst you might be getting a lot of attention and attraction, because that's what happens in this Aboriginal health space, is you get so lost into the ego of it, the power of it, player, it's all, and we can be so tricked into thinking we're doing good things. And it's never the case. Because if it was the case, we wouldn't see the stories we hear continue to today. So, yeah.
and your work, Rakita, reminds me of a story I'll share just from, and you know this story, a number of years back where we spent 2 years as a team of people doing a whole lot of work, and in the end, I was sitting there I was given the final draft of the paper, and I said, we can't submit this. All we did was find exactly what we knew was there.
Yeah.
And it just problematised Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
And so all we found was that Aboriginal people were a problem, and that their health was a problem of their problems. So,
Yeah, it's a problem of problem.
yes.
The ironic paradox. Yeah.
Thank you for giving so much
No
to us
worries.
today and even sharing your poetry and everything. Thank you. It
No
was
worries.
deep reading and very brave, as Kim said.
Oh, it's not brave. This is me.
All right. Well, as a momentary interlude, I'm going to load the next set of slides, but Mel has prepared some fruit for us out here. But we're going to hold the door so you can't leave. You've got to come back. We're very scared about having a break, but we'll lose everybody. Please, I'm delighted to say that our keynote speaker, Professor Peter Anderson, has joined us and is here. And so absolutely worth coming back for.